Victoria has just endured another election season and presumably everyone over the age of 18 has cast their vote, or they'll be facing a nasty fine. But some senior politicians think we're missing out on one major demographic of people here, 16 and 17-year-olds.
A Senate inquiry on whether the voting age should be lowered has been the topic at multiple public hearings around the country. Headed by Green Senator Jordan Steele-John, the bill is likely to be decided upon this month. Labor MP Andrew Giles chaired the inquiry in Melbourne.
It's political inequality that's driving economic inequality. It's people who have less of a say that are getting less of the benefits. Increasingly, we've got evidence that young Australians are not getting a fair go, and that's been compounded by a sense that they are being shut out from political participation.
So why are they being shut out?
It's our fault as politicians for making politics, quite frankly, dry as fuck, and then wondering why nobody engages with it.
Among the many justifications behind the bill, Senator Steele-John is convinced that shaking up the electorate will force out-of-touch politicians to make more effort with younger people and counter a slide towards political apathy. But what do others think?
So I think they should be given the vote.
Lucas Walsh, Professor of Education Policy and Practice and Youth Studies, researches the growing disconnect between young people and politics.
We have a curriculum that has enormous possibility, but seeing that practiced in classrooms is very, very uneven. But I think more importantly, they're not given really authentic opportunities to actually participate and engage in democracy.
This isn't the first time that the idea of lowering the age has been introduced to the Senate. It's been a cyclical debate for about a decade. Professor Walsh says we should look to other countries which have already lowered the voting age, like Austria, parts of Germany and Argentina.
But the really interesting example is the Scottish referendum in 2014, and that age group was able to participate and 3/4 of them turned up to vote. And when you see those issues resonate, they will come.
After Labor's landslide victory in Victoria over the weekend, it isn't hard to imagine that young people aren't too distant from these strong societal and political undercurrents. In fact, many young people already are politically active, but in non-conventional ways, such as through volunteering, union memberships, and campaigning for issues. This past week alone has seen unprecedented levels of students protesting the government's stance towards climate change. Thousands of students have gone on strike from school in over 30 cities nationwide.
Do something about this.
But not everyone is sold.
I don't think that there is justification for lowering the voting age to 16. It's widely accepted that citizenship is a two-way street. In exchange for certain benefits of being a citizen of a country, you're expected to make certain contributions to the nation state. When the voting age in Australia was lowered to 18 from 21 in the 1970s, so the argument was if 18 is the age at which you can be conscripted for war, then the voting age should be lowered. And I'd take my line from that.
But viewing citizenship in such a way creates a civic deficit, says Andrew Giles.
The thing that I'm really worried about is ensuring that our democracy is everything it should be, which means that everyone has an equal say.
Another reason for keeping the status quo points to the idea of maturity.
Science informs us that young people are neurologically not full adults, even at 18 years of age. Or so says Managing Director of the Australian Christian Lobby, Martin Isles. But is that exactly true? I've come to the Melbourne Neuroscience Institute to get to the bottom of that. And if it is true, should it even have a bearing on whether 16 and 17-year-olds should be allowed to vote?
Our brain stabilizes around 30 years of age, actually. White matter is thought to represent how we process complex information. So 16 and 17-year-olds have similar white matter density as a 65-year-old. So if you think about it, then if 16 and 17-year-olds are not allowed to vote, then we can also say that once you're past over the age of 65, you should also not be allowed to vote if we just based it on biology.
So if we can't turn to science to explain adulthood either, then let's look to the law.
The law basically sees adulthood as kicking in at 18. In order to obtain property, for example, you must be 18 years of age or above. Certain individuals at 15 may be amazingly sophisticated and have a very good grasp of the political process, and on the basis of that should be entitled to participate. But then it may well be that there's someone in their 40s who has no idea whatsoever what's going on, and they're required to participate. So the legal system and the political system has to come to some sort of consensus at what point does adulthood kick in. At the moment it's at 18. I think that's about right.
I think that's a pretty poor argument. It used to be the case that only men who owned property got to vote. I think that was pretty bad, both the men thing and the property thing.
You are considered old enough at 16 to work, to drive a car, to pay superannuation, make decisions around your own body, to have sex, and yet you can't shape laws at the ballot box like everyone else does.
Also, many young people earn incomes, and invariably they are subject to pay tax.
I just don't think that the argument, just because you pay tax, you should vote, be able to vote, is sustainable in a modern situation where there is a consumption tax and everybody who's buying something suddenly could become, potentially, a voter. Yeah? We're starting to get into the realm of the ridiculous now. I'm even less persuaded when I consider the political reasons behind it. It's a position that's being advocated by the Greens and the Australian Labor Party, and they're advocating it in anticipation of partisan advantage.
When people have actually done research, there's actually a multiplicity of different views among that cohort, and they don't swing as hard to the left as people perceive. But no doubt, young people do, of course, vote more for progressive parties. But since when has that been a criteria as to whether or not a certain demographic is afforded the vote?
Partisan advantage or not, if you thought the debate was an easy yes or no question, think again. If such changes were to go ahead, should voting be voluntary or compulsory like the rest of the country? Senator Steele John thinks it should be voluntary.
It's an opportunity for empowerment, not an imposition.
My concern is if we move to a voluntary voting system for young Australians, only those who have had advantages in life will be represented, or they'll be overrepresented, and we won't hear the full diversity of 16 and 17-year-olds.
Enough from the adults, or at least adults in the eyes of the law. What do young people think?
My name is Ren Gillett and I'm currently an executive member of the Vic SRC, and I believe that 16-year-olds should vote.
Ren spoke to the Senate inquiry a few months ago and her position was very clear.
Yeah, I think young people are really intelligent, and I'm not saying that young people, weren't back when the vote was originally changed and that 18-year-olds, aren't as intelligent. We're being quite well educated now, and I think that we're really in a prime moment in history where I think young people really have the capacity.
Students from McKinnon Secondary School would also like to vote.
It's just a better reflection of what the country thinks.
I would like to have a say in what happens in the future and the laws and legislations that will affect me.
Voting should be allowed for 16-year-olds, but it should be done with caution and it should be voluntary.
I feel like in politics it's more focused towards adults when it should just be about the younger people of society as it is their future and not people that have already experienced that and had the time.
Is there cause to be worried if it goes ahead?
Well, no, because if that's the decision that is made by policymakers, then one has to accept, and then have a lot of fun looking back and seeing if all the dire predictions you made about what would happen actually come true.